Psychologists/therapists of Reddit, have you ever had a patient that you thought was a lost cause? If so, why? My wife is a therapist that specializes in eating disorders. She has had clients that she got in such bad shape she sent directly to Inpatient, and they eventually died. Usually they come in, and she diagnoses them, realizes how far gone they are immediately, and sends them to Inpatient right then. I haven't had a lost cause yet in 12 plus years. Near impossible causes, but no lost ones. However, the clients who are in therapy for years or decades without making any attempts to use the strategies taught in sessions and repeating the same narrative indefinitely while complaining that they are not getting better or lamenting the perception that no one ever tries to help them while sitting in a helper's office are the most frustrating to me. A therapist points out the paths the client has to do the walking. Baby steps are fine. Falling down is fine. Walking really slowly is fine. Needing someone to walk beside them, prompting each step is fine. No effort to move for years. Not fine. I'll do it backwards. My wife was diagnosed with bipolar II. Took a lot for her to finally seek help. But that's for another thread. First psychologist she saw promptly informed her she had a 25% of killing herself. She left in tears. Took her months to get past that. She eventually found a psychologist who she trusted, and she's never been better, going on 8 years now. Just graduated with a master's degree. All therapists, psychologists, doctors etc. are not the same. Find one you like and trust. And don't become disillusioned because the first few you meet are fucking terrible. Because some are absolutely fucking terrible. Doctor but not a psychiatrist. I have never met a patient who is a lost cause, but there are frequently patients who need more help than the system can provide. Can someone overcome 10 years of IV drug use and get clean? Absolutely. Will it be a million times more difficult if their childhood was filled with abuse and neglect and they never had a chance to learn effective coping skills? What if they don't have any family support and no health insurance? Oh, and if they happen to be homeless with undiagnosed bipolar disorder or schizophrenia while living in a community without resources for mental health and substance abuse treatment? Yesterday I took care of a patient with almost all of those factors. Right now he is clean, but he is living in a shelter around people who are using drugs. He doesn't have access to therapy to help him recover from a lifetime of trauma. He is trying to take his antipsychotics every day, but they frequently get stolen or lost and he doesn't have any money or insurance to replace them. Do I think it's possible he will stay clean? Yes. Will I be surprised if he starts using again? No. I'll keep doing my best to help him and all my other patients in impossible situations, recognizing that it will always be an uphill battle. I work with children with autism, and while I've never thought any of my kids are lost causes, their families occasionally. Absolutely. There's no good way to explain to someone that yes, I can come into your home and teach your kid a million things, but at the end of the day you have to be a parent and support us too. Nothing we do will ever fully work without caregivers being on board and willing to do their share of the lifting. It's frustrating as hell, honestly. Worked as a residential counselor at a facility for mostly violent foster youth. There was one client who had extreme oppositional defiance disorder, and she fought all the time to the point where multiple staff were injured by her. She also got plugged in with a pimp. I thought there was no way she'd turn around but still prayed for something to happen. She ended up getting adopted by her two coaches. Dad was her personal trainer and mom was a sports coach. The day she left the agency she was really rude and cussed everyone out. Her dad caught wind of it and made her apologize and do the goodbyes again. This girl never respected any authority before, but this couple got her respect by being her coaches. I ran into her a couple years later, and she was really respectful and sweet, and she seemed to be doing well in school. It brought a happy tear to my eye. Actually, I'm a therapist. I tend to look at it, not in terms of possible versus impossible, but rather in terms of helping them further on their path towards mental health. If I'm able to help them move further on that path than they previously were, that is a win. There are plenty of clients where I don't see dramatic change, but do see small improvements over time. People are complicated, and so is their pain, but as long as I can improve their life in some way, I wouldn't call it a lost cause. Not my job to cure people, just to help them move towards mental health. After 2 years of progress and sobriety, he finally got approved for disability. They gave him $18,000 lump sum for back pay. Next time I see him, he's covered in one Abe gangster douche outfit and obviously high. He tells me he got his lump sum and his constant check, so he doesn't think he needs to continue with therapy. He spent the $18,000 in 3 weeks on cocaine and alcohol. After his arrest, again, he was sent back to the facility I worked for. This was after he tried to kill his mother and hang himself, again. I had one consultation with him upon his return. He attempted to blame me for everything that happened. I recommend he complete his sentence in jail. My supervisor agreed, and off he went to spend a year locked in a cell reflecting on what got him there. My wife is a PMHNP, clinical. She has a patient who is just adversarial. She calls him back, quote, "My guy. I saw my guy today. He's not particularly bad off. He's a decent enough person and his problems are minor. He's just so adversarial that she can't help him with his issues. Everything is a debate. And he's planned out every road out of an issue and put a roadblock there for her to run into. She tries to talk about the roadblock, maybe his refusal to communicate with his next door neighbor. He turns it into a debate about why the communication is impossible and pointless, and how Robert Sapolsky says that communication between groups is just a blah blah blah. On top of that, he's actually pretty knowledgeable about a lot of things, and if she mentions something that he isn't familiar with, the next time she sees him, he is familiar with it and has his defense ready. Funny enough, the way she described his personality to me was, "He's a lot like you." She doesn't know what she's talking about though, because she's inside the relationship, so she's naturally going to be biased in the way she sees me. We'd really need an outside perspective. As a psychiatry practitioner, she should be aware of that. I'll start. I'm not a therapist, but I'm studying to be one. But this is actually from one of my stays in an inpatient psych hospital. I'm alright now, but it was a dark time. I was there for some suicidal thoughts when I was about 13. A lot of kids were in very similar situations, but we all got along decently. Everyone was polite and respectful, and we were there to get help. And then a new kid was admitted. We'll call him Lucas. Lucas was there for anger problems, and sure, that's cool. He's here to get help. Or that's what I thought. Lucas was extremely volatile, constantly yelling, punching patients and staff, and so on. But again, he's in the right place to get help. Then when I tried to talk to him, friendly to a fault, he told me to go hang myself. Alright, well, he only got more angry as his stay went on. It came out he was there because he smashed up his mom's car with a golf club for taking away his phone. Now, I'd seen his mom during his visits. She seemed normal enough. She was very clearly well off. Looked a bit like an upper class mom from a direct-to-TV Lifetime original movie. He had to be restrained once during a visit to prevent him from hurting her. He would get on the phone in the phone booth and have loud screaming matches with her. I always felt so bad for her. No one was safe from Lucas's rage either. The 10-year-old on the unit with us, children's unit, was overcrowded. Nope. Told him to jump off a roof. Staff? Absolutely not. Told them that they were bitches and flung a few racial slurs at them too. Doctors? No. He genuinely called them quacks and threatened to have his dad sue them. For what I couldn't tell you. I left that unit because I was discharged 4 days after he came in, but I left thinking that there was no hope for him. He seemed to think he was God's gift and that he was right 100% of the time, and he had absolutely no care for anyone but himself. While I'm not a therapist or psychologist myself, I did have about a 2-week-long stay in a mental hospital back in 2017. During the first week, we got a patient I'll call Jabba the Hutt. Jabba towered over all of us, even some of the adults, and was easily 300 pounds. Jabba had the mental capacity of a small child and had no concept of volume control. Every time she talked, it was screamed at the top of her lungs, and she was also notably violent. She once attacked a girl in the hallway I was in, and the whole place went off the rails while they contained Jabba. There was another girl who threw chairs down the hallway when Jabba started raving, and the two would always loudly argue since their rooms were across from one another. Jabber, when she'd hit you, would never hit like throwing a regular punch. Rather, she'd bring down a hammer fist, usually right on the female nurses' chests. While she was there, one of the nurses admitted they didn't have the resources to really do anything to help her. They were just glorified babysitters. She really should've gone to the hospital in the inner city that housed more along the lines of the criminally insane, but she got dumped on the mental hospital equivalent to Weenie Hut Juniors. She got away with telling us all to shut up and swore at the kids in the hall whenever things weren't going her way. She constantly got doses of what we call booty juice. Essentially it's a sedative delivered in the rear. You've got Google. I remember one time after visiting ours, my parents were leaving and Jabber and the other girl were screaming obscenities at each other, and they told me another family was coming in with their daughter. My parents said the other family looked horrified that this was what was going on in a place they were trusting their daughter's care in. Honestly, one of the biggest problems with that place, in general, was no separation between the seriously violent patients with the majority, who are more likely to hurt themselves than others. I have way more stories about that place, but I think Jabber's was the only truly lost cause I saw during my stay. We had a patient who was intractable with self-harm and accomplished at being dangerous without being life-threatening. Over the past 5 or 6 years, I've put dozens of sutures into various parts. Keep in mind that best treatment of puncture wounds is often not closure. I've helped this person spend probably 1/4 to 1/3 of those years be treated inpatient in various long and short-term facilities. They had all available treatments including TMS and ECT in addition to all the meds and therapy. They continued to self-harm in ever more publicly disruptive ways. The state psychologist recommended writing the patient up as a case report of intractable self-harm. Not a therapist. Have a family member that I feel sorry for the psychologist, psychiatrist and GP that have to deal with him because he doesn't listen and won't do anything he needs to. In his mind he is a perpetual victim and no one could possibly understand. He had bone cancer at 12. As a result he had to have an arm amputated. In his mind no one has ever or ever will have it as bad as he does. You can't talk to him because it always ends with "you know how I am." At 67 years old he is mentally stuck at the maturity of a 12-year-old and tells you so when he can't deal with something. In August he was so bad for a couple of weeks that psychologist, psychiatrist and GP all told him to check into the local mental hospital. He wouldn't do it because he's done it once and it didn't help. Some people just want it to go away but won't do anything about it. He thrives on being a victim. Lost? No. Somewhere you know they are not going to improve beyond a small amount. You just work with them to manage their symptoms, attempt skill building, and work more in the moment. It was a struggle to learn that I can't fix everyone but rather work within their ability. I work with children mostly, and echoing other sentiments, lost cause isn't really a useful label. But I do often see people who for lots of different reasons are not at all likely to either personally make changes that will benefit them, have very little personal agency, or are part of family system that is very likely to continue to cause them distress for as long as they are a part of it. On top of that, there are some people with significant psychosis, which if untreated, will most likely prevent them from having a healthy and safe life. With that said, seeking the help of a therapist is an excellent way to move toward a better life for overwhelming majority of people who I see. I've had multiple therapists tell me that there was basically nothing that therapy could do for me and that they recommended I not even bother seeking out another therapist. I've been in and out of therapy since I was a young kid, diagnosed with all sorts of stuff, had depression, schizoaffective, bipolar, put on a wide variety of medications, and hospitalized a few times, both voluntarily and involuntary, though I think I've mostly been getting worse as time's passed. My most common symptoms have been depressive, didn't enjoy life a whole lot, not motivated in school, and at this point I've lost interest in and stopped enjoying pretty much everything. I've had a few psychotic breaks over the years but none that lasted much more than a week or so. I never missed appointments. I was always willing to talk and answer questions and share my feelings to the best of my ability. One of the therapists that told me that therapy wouldn't help me remarked that my thinking was perfectly reasonable, but that my emotions were so thoroughly dysfunctional that no amount of discussion or advice would make any difference. Occasionally I'd do something they asked. My last therapist encouraged me enough that I found and attended a local group that played various card/board games on Friday nights. I went for maybe a couple months before I didn't feel like going anymore. Most of the time I told my therapists that I made no promises of being interested enough to do anything at all. I wouldn't say I'm 100% a lost cause, but I can't exactly blame them for thinking that therapy seemed ineffective for me, though I think a couple didn't want to admit that maybe a more compatible therapist could have been at least a little more helpful than them. I'd say the worst therapist I've ever had actually refused to admit that I had any real problems at all. This was after I had been involuntarily committed for a month for a psychotic break, and in direct contradiction to many other mental health professionals' opinions to which he had access. Dude seemed like he had the empathy of a rock. I'm a school psychologist, and I hate to say any kid is hopeless, but there's some kids that sure seem that way. Mostly because we can't contend with everything that happens at home. We have one kid in first grade right now who gets no discipline at home. We are trying our best, but his mom reinforces his behaviors, and there's only so much we can do when we only see him for 5 hours of the day. Then there's other kids who just have so much trauma and dysfunction at home, and the only support they get is at school. We have a great time at the school, but again, 5 hours a day for 10 months a year. Luckily these cases are few, but they wear on me. The kids could do so much better with a better home environment. 1. I had a patient who was a complete sociopath, but not in a mean way. He exploited other people when he could, utterly neglected his family, but not cruel. He was the only person I've ever met who just really, honestly, from the bottom of his heart, wanted to be left alone to do meth until he died. He just wasn't at all conflicted about it, so even from a motivational interviewing standpoint, I had nothing to work with. A lot of people in treatment don't want to be there. If you don't want to be there, nothing we say or do matters very much. A lot of people in treatment feel comfortable in the chaos of their life, so functionality feels foreign, so they sabotage it to get back to what's normal for them. Some folks are completely enabled as well, which prevents them from hitting bottom or experiencing the true consequences of their choices. I've worked with several gambling addicts whose parents have always bailed them out. Even in instances of legal consequences, their parents stepped up and bailed out their kids financially. If you're never held accountable, why change? Therapist here. I won't discuss a particular client, but I will quickly touch on reoccurring patterns. Motivation level for people needs to be high. If it's not, they won't change, and they'll remain stuck. Also, those who play the blame game tend to be a lost cause. Why? Because they only tell you what they want to and nothing can ever be their fault. I've worked with child and animal abusers who usually have someone else to blame. The lack of insight is a dead giveaway for letting me know who is a lost cause and who isn't.